Hey guys, and welcome to another photo editing video. Now, as you can see, this is not really my desk, and also, additionally to you, I've got you right there. So, I just figured because this is so beautiful here out in the Swedish forest, why not just take out the laptop and edit here and kinda up the production value. Today I'm gonna take this raw file right here, actually these raw files, I'm gonna stitch them together into an HDR and then edit it and turn it into the best possible picture at the end, while of course showing you every single step from start to finish. And by the way, this is a Scottish castle, cause what is more fitting than editing a Scottish picture in a Swedish forest, right? Alright, whatever, let's get started here. Now I'm sure you guys know it, so just select any picture of your sequence if you want to stitch together in HDR, remove the chromatic aberration here in the lens corrections, enable the profile corrections, then just shift click all the way to the right, synchronize, check all, or at least check the ones that you actually adjusted. Then you have everything, and now we have everything selected down here. So I'm just going to right click, photo merge, HDR. And as you can see, this is a very contrasty scene. You have an extremely bright sun in the scene, as well as some quite dark shadows. So I think I've got like nine pictures here, and that's really a lot. I usually shoot HDRs manually with one exposure difference, so just shooting first of all a picture that has a lot of shadow detail, and then afterwards is one stop darker, then another one a stop darker, and so on. You could also do it in like a 2-stop increment, to be honest. And you always want to use shutter speed for that, of course. Alright, so we've got our HDR here. Now auto align, always want to have that checked, and auto tone, you know, that makes it kind of edit it for you in an overly done way. I mean, it doesn't look bad, but I'm just going to disable that. Deghost amount, there's no ghosting here, no moving stuff. So let's just merge. This is going to take like a minute, but for you guys, it is already done. So if I show you this here, alright, so we've got our HDR file, but now if I raise the shadows, look at how much detail we can get out of here, as well as bringing down the highlights just a ton. And compared to like even a medium exposure from before from a single raw file, you could never even get close to what you could with an HDR. As you can see, highlights all the way down, shadows all the way up, and it looks nowhere close to how it looks in an HDR, as well as of course you have much greater quality at the end. So let's actually keep it at that, because I really love bright shadows, and yeah, I also want to have all of these highlight details so I can actually see the sun and all of the clouds there. But as you can see, by bringing down the highlights especially, we do get rid of some of that dynamic. And I really love dynamic, I mean, probably my favorite word, but I want to bring that back by bringing up the whites. And as you can see, the whites will just make the entire picture more bright, but in a good way. You know, it will not clip so many of the bright parts. Of course, if you go too far, then it might not be that great, but if you hold down the Alt key, which is what I would suggest you to do, you can actually see when something clips. And in this case, you know, if just some of this sun right here is clipped, it doesn't matter so much to me, so I'm just gonna leave it at like that, you know, plus 68, that's quite a lot, but I really like it here. Then the blacks, now because we brought up the shadows so much and we have all of this detail to bring up the shadows, there is some contrast and just some difference missing. So for that, I actually really want to go into the minus blacks, because blacks are kind of a more aggressive contrast. It really affects the darker parts more than the overall picture. But still, speaking of that, I do want to bring up the contrast itself by a little bit, although it is very important, for me at least, not to go too far, because it is very easy to just, you know, make it look kind of overdone and crush all of the blacks. And clarity, yeah, this is a great example, because a lot of people will think always clarity is a good thing, and the thing about clarity is it is a very structured contrast. So if you bring it up, you will bring up all of the textures and all of the, the clarity, the sharpness, the crispness of every single little thing. And this can be a great thing, and especially for black and white pictures or mountains or cityscape, whatever. But for landscapes, as this one, where you have ton of grass and such small detailed structures everywhere, it kind of can make it look cluttered and just ugly and, HDR-ish, which I really don't want. So instead, I'm actually going to experiment with going into the minus clarity, although I think, maybe just like -6, -7. You definitely want to be careful with going into the minus, because you can make your picture look a bit blurry if you go crazy into the minus amounts. But yeah, about -6 here into the clarity. Always at least consider going into the minus, don't just go into the plus. And of course, do whatever you like best with all of these adjustments. This is really just kind of, trying to share my point of view. And vibrance, want to bring that up a bit. Now, I don't think that it needs any saturation though. Saturation brings up the entire color very broadly, whereas the vibrance brings up all of the colors that are not as prominent, so it's kind of a smarter way of doing it. Sometimes I mix them, but here I think I'm just gonna go like +13 or something. And color temperature is another very important thing. Now, if you've seen any of my previous sunset editing videos, you will know that I actually like, instead of going into the warm tones, I really like to go into the blues. And I want to do that more than I actually want the picture to look like at the end. And that is because I'm going to go into the split toning right after. And the split toning highlights, by the way, you can just click on this little box and it will give you a color palette. And by choosing different colors here, you can actually add color into the highlight areas. And this is great because it looks way more natural if you do it that way, since naturally speaking, all of the color comes from the light, whether it be a sun or a lamp or whatever. So you can, if I don't get eaten alive by these insects, then I can add some magenta and maybe some warmth as well, in the sky here. I don't want to go crazy for this one, even though there would certainly be room if you really wanted to go for something like that. But around 30 saturation, 35 maybe, and then not go quite too far into the reds. That looks pretty good. And then I also like to really go into the shadows and just add a bit of blues, but a very light blue in this case actually, because that adds differentiation. And differentiation, as long as you can make it look natural and you don't overdo it and you actually use a bunch of different colors that work together, then you can add so much to your picture and add so much depth and interest that you would otherwise not have. This is why I love the split toning. So again, just a little bit into the light blues here, and nothing crazy, nothing close to what I've done in the split toning. Really just like 10, 11, and that already looks pretty good to me. So just to show you the before and after any split toning, this is before, this is after, and as you can see, it looks more colorful, but I like it way more than just going into the color temperature and adding warmth there. And I guess this brings up like another point, because in Lightroom, if you really want to get the most out of it, then you have to combine different sliders together. You can't just go to a single slider and just, look at the picture and do whatever looks best right there and then. You kind of always have to keep in mind what you want to do next and what you want to use the slider with. Because if you combine everything and you really, consider every slider and how you want to use it, you will get the best result at the end. But of course, if you're starting or you're not super familiar with it, that can be very tough, and I wouldn't really recommend you to worry too much about it. It's just something that comes naturally, but just be aware of that. I do that a lot, just raising the shadows, but then bringing down the blacks, for example, because I want to have bright shadows, but still a little bit of contrast and darkness in them. So that really is, I think, one of the key aspects to get the best possible. Sorry, there's a mosquito there. So that's how you get the best possible picture at the end. Alright, so let's keep it up at a little bit of a faster pace, and go into the tonal curve, I guess. And tonal curve is great for fine adjusting everything, so you can really take control of the highlights and the shadows. And also, I think, what I think I'm gonna do is bring up the darks again, and then just bring down the shadows, because the shadows will affect the very dark blacks in the tonal curve here. And the highlights are doing kind of the same thing, so I actually want to bring them down a bit. Furthermore, let me actually try to add medium contrast, but that's, it really doesn't work. It's kind of a very fine contrast here in the point curve. And also HSL tool. Okay, so here you could of course fine-tune all of the colors, do all of the crazy adjustments. If you really want your greens to look just exactly the hue and saturation and luminance that you actually want. Let's actually go real quick into it, change the hue of the grass to a bit more of a green rather than orangey green mix, and also add a bit of saturation for these greens. Other than that though, I think I don't really have to do too much. So let's scroll down again, and split toning, I've already done that. Detail is another thing that it's not that creative, but I think it's very important if you export your pictures, which, what else are you gonna do? Even for like Facebook, you can get so much more out of it if you add some sharpening and color noise reduction and stuff like that. But because it's so technical and kind of boring, I'm just gonna leave that out. I've got a lot of videos about that in case you want to check them out. Also, no use for transform, but I do have a use for effects and vignetting. You guys know I love vignetting, but especially here. You have such a bright overall picture right here, and by bringing down the vignetting and just making the corners darker, also gonna adjust, the feather here, but just by making the corners darker, you can emphasize much more attention on the actual center, but also you bring back some of that mood, some of that a little bit of gloomy darkness, because it was shot at sunset and not at mid-daylight. So I think that looks pretty good. And lastly, After Effects, we would have the camera calibration tool, but honestly, camera calibration, it's again about profile, look, and about the color difference, if you really want to fine adjust stuff. But because it's already such a long video, I think I'm just gonna skip that here, as it is not really something to explain anyways, but rather very personal and very picture dependent on what you go for. Alright, so let's just check real quick from before and after. Now, I don't know about you, but I like this look, but sometimes it's really great if you look at the before and after, because if you just edit and edit and edit without comparing it to the original, it is kind of easy to get carried away and just over-edit something. So right now, I think I'm actually going to bring down some of the shadows, not bring them quite as crazily up. And also, I want to, bring up the blacks instead, not so much contrast, and even bring down the clarity a little bit further. And I think this is much more natural looking right now. And I definitely prefer it, because I think at sunset pictures, you should have at least a little bit of a hint of kind of darkness and not just have everything bright as in mid-daylight. Alright, so now let's go into the local adjustments, and the gradient filters are great for adjusting large areas, for example the sky. And what I think I'm gonna do here is just make the top right part of the sky a little bit brighter. And I'm gonna do that by having a very soft gradient, so it actually blends in with the rest of the picture. And then I'm gonna do the exact opposite with the left area. And I'm sure you've heard me explain that a lot of times, but I'm still gonna do it again, because that is something you wanna do to add additional complexity to the side where you have your light coming from, make it brighter, and kind of doing the opposite with the other side, adds interest, adds dynamic, all of that kind of stuff that we want here. Now going to the radial filter for the dodge and burning, you always want to make sure you invert the mask, because otherwise the adjustment will be outside of the filter. Okay, so after inverting the filter, I want to first of all add some plus exposure, mix that with some plus whites, and definitely some warm tones as well, to just add some bright areas over some parts that, could just use some additional areas. And this is very unpractical to just look behind me while I'm doing that, but hopefully it will be kind of more interesting to watch that way. This is my first time recording out in nature, and hopefully not my last time, depending on how you guys enjoy it. So while I'm adding some dodge and burning, there's not really too much to explain here, except that you just enhance some of the parts of the lighting, and you make it more interesting and add color and warmth in a very local way. So just do that in a natural or in a reasonable way to not go overboard, and it can make your picture look much, much better. But yeah, like if you guys enjoy these kinds of videos out in nature, then I'm definitely gonna make more of them, because these are quite fun if you ask me. Except for the insects that are constantly attacking me. Alright, so I think in terms of plus exposure, that looks pretty good. At very last, I'm also gonna add at least some minus exposure filters. Not quite as many as plus exposure, but at least some. So I think, yeah, again, invert the mask, very, very important. And also, I should have brought the feather all the way to 100, because that way it will blend in much more naturally with the rest of the picture. And I just want to go in between here. Honestly, I think that looks pretty good already. There's not so much opportunity for minus exposure, but yeah, let's just add another one right there on the rock to add some contrast that way. And a very last over here as well. Alright, so I think that is pretty much it. It's everything I'm gonna do to this photo. You know what, I'm just gonna add real quick a bit of sharpening, add a bit of masking while holding down the Alt key to make sure I only have that selected that I actually want to be sharpened, and of course take out the color noise by bringing that up to around 80. So, as very last thing, of course, as always, let's compare the raw file here. Well, it's an HDR file stitched together, but it pretty much looks like a raw file and it's unedited. And afterwards, this is the picture at the end. You might think this is completely over-edited, and to be honest, you might have a point, but keep in mind, if you don't want to go quite as crazy as I've gone here, just go a quarter as much, half as much. Leave out the adjustments that you don't think make any sense or you don't like in your editing style. Because that's always the thing. No matter what video, what article, whatever you watch or read, just take whatever you think is useful from that and disregard the rest, because at the end, it's all about learning and getting as much information as possible, but then be selective and actually just use what you think makes sense for your own editing style. Alright though, so that's been it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. It was actually quite nice, except for the insects. But yeah, let me know if you would like to see more of these videos out in nature with two cameras. Maybe I should position them a little bit more smartly. But yeah, always comment or just like or dislike, I guess. Other than that, have a wonderful day and keep taking awesome pictures.